good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for this amazing program that I'm so excited to introduce. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Elisa Pichamaran-Alexander, and I am the Robert M. and Ruth L. Halprin Associate Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art. And with Marci Kwon, I co-direct the Asian American Art Initiative here at the Cantor Art Center at Stanford. Before we continue, I would like to acknowledge that Stanford sits on the ancestral land of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe.
Stanford sits on the ancestral lands of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe.
This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people.
Consistent with our values of community and inclusion,
We have a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and make visible
the university's relationship to Native peoples.
So today, we are gathered as the Cantor Art Center's Asian American Art Initiative in collaboration with Aperture is very pleased to present this virtual roundtable discussion investigating themes of identity and familial presence within Aperture magazine's most recent issue, Being and Becoming Asian in America, which I'm sure, as Marci will touch on, we both think is just such an incredible contribution to the field. And I know I'll be referring back to this issue time and time again as the years go on. So this conversation will include the guest editor of this issue, Stephanie Hueon Tung, Professor Marci Kwon, the artist Leonard Suryajaya, and Pao Houa Her. We'll be hearing from each of the artists and participants directly in a moment, so I'll keep my introductions brief. So Stephanie Hueon Tung is the Byrne Family Curator of Photography at the Peabody Essex Museum. She leads the interpretation and presentation of the museum's growing photography collection, which spans the 19th century through today. A specialist in the history of photography of China, her research focuses on transnational art exchanges, global modernism, translation studies, and notions of artistic labor. Marci Kwon is assistant professor of art history at Stanford University and co-director of the Asian American Art Initiative. She is the author of Enchantments, Joseph Cornell and American Modernism, and co-editor of the online Martin Wong catalog Raisonné. Kwon is presently working on a book-length project about artists in post-earthquake San Francisco Chinatown. Leonard Suryajaya is a Chinese-Indonesian artist exploring the boundaries of intimacy, community, and family. He uses photography, video, performance, and installation to show how the everyday is layered with histories, meanings, and potential. Pao Houa Her is a Hmong American artist who works within multiple genres and photography and whose practice engages primarily with legacies and potentials of landscape, portraiture, and documentary photographic traditions and aesthetics, creating works that examine identity, longing, and belonging in Hmong diasporic communities. We're going to have time, dedicated time at the end for questions and answers at the end of the event, so please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. So without further ado, I'm so pleased to hand it over to Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. Hi, my name is Stephanie Tung, and I am the guest editor of the most recent issue of Aperture magazine, Being and Becoming Asian in America. Thank you to the Cantor and Aperture for co-organizing this. With this program, Aperture is thrilled to collaborate with the Cantor Art Center's Asian American Arts Initiative at Stanford University. Just a little bit of background about Aperture. Aperture is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1952 by a group of artists, writers, and curators as a common ground for photography. Aperture today is a multi-platform publisher that unites the photography community in print, in person, and online. It was a pleasure to guest edit this issue. This issue explores the myriad ways in which Asian American image makers have approached questions of visibility and belonging on their own terms. And they create works that reveal the full complexity and diversity of stories that make the experience of being Asian American. Now, this particular panel, Kinship in the Camera, explores the notions of family, but it's family beyond one's blood relatives to this idea of an expanded family that thinks about a larger sort of sense of community and how that connects to larger issues related to being Asian in America. So just a little bit of idea of what we're going to be talking about today. So turning it over to Marci now to talk about the Asian American Initiative.
Mm-hmm. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of the conversation today. I'm Marci Kwon, and with Elisa, I co-direct the AAAI. So at the core of the Asian American Art Initiative is a dedication to original works of art, primary sources, including archives and artists' voices, which we activate through education, original research projects like the online Martin Wong Catalog Raisonné, and exhibitions such as East of the Pacific, Making Histories of Asian American Art, curated by Elisa. So we were really delighted to see that several of the artists featured in the companion exhibition At Home on Stage, curated by Maggie Dethloff, were featured in this special issue, and that contributors to the issue conducted research in the AAAI archives. So the gerund in the title of Aperture Special Issue, Being and Becoming Asian in America, emphasizes process over product or settled identity, embodying the ongoingness of each work of art and artist. So as Stephanie Tung wisely writes in her introduction to this issue, quote, reconciling this yearning to be seen, to find meaning, to be acknowledged, and finally belong with the habits of opacity is part of the process of being and becoming Asian in America. So this line made me cry when I read it. Here, we and those who do not identify as we are allowed grief, joy, ambivalence, complexity, beauty, are honored, in other words, for the fullness of their and our existence. And this is, to me, the gift of being and becoming Asian in America for all of us, and for the future study of these artists and art history. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leonard to give a presentation on their work.
Hi, I'm trying to start my video, but it says the host. Okay, there you go. Okay, I'm back on. Hi, I'm Leonard Suryajaya. I am currently in Chicago, and I'm happy to share a little bit about myself and my practice. So if we can go to the first slide, I want to introduce you to my mother. So my mom is a common collaborator in my work, and it all started when I was a photography student in my undergrad in California, where I would go every winter break to Indonesia and say, hey, would you please help me pose in my photo so I can get a jump start on my projects? I can try to frame you, I can compose different sets of lightings and figure out how I can be a good student. So from that point on, it just became a new language that my family understands me by, because in that experience, they really see how I try to occupy myself to my fullest. Because in the past, I sometimes may not have the best way to communicate myself or my feelings or even my truth as a queer person. So just thinking about how it all started, I started asking more questions in how I could utilize my photography to include people in my life. Next slide, please. And I first moved to California when I turned 18. My birthday is in 2 days. So I turned I turned 18 on the plane, moving from Indonesia to California just a few weeks before school starts, just to get settled. And my mom came with me at the time. And a lot of the time in the beginning of my practice with photography, I use photography as a medium to kind of ask these larger questions surrounding my selfhood. Because, next slide, I always feel somehow disconnected from myself because I grew up at a time where Chinese identity and Chinese culture were not allowed. It was banned. Chinese language were not allowed to be spoken. My parents were born with Chinese names, and in their childhood, they had to change their names. And they went through a time where they had to hide, assimilate, and also just figure out new ways to survive. So those were kind of like my childhood stories that I grew up with. So when I turned 18 and found myself in California, I asked myself again, like, okay, what is the truest, authentic form of who I am? Because when I was in Indonesia, I always never felt complete. Next slide. I always feel like being Chinese was not okay, but at the same time, we didn't understand how to be this hybrid person who suddenly had to fully adopt a new culture that we never fully understood because we were always the minority that was not included. And also being queer, I always think on a spectrum. You know, things are never right or wrong. Things are never black or white. And a lot of the times that predisposition kind of creates challenges in my communication, especially with my family. Next slide. And being a millennial, you know, like I imagine being an Asian son who can fact check my dad before he even understood what that technology was like. I grew up as this like disobedient, ungrateful, selfish, doomed Asian boy because he's exactly not right. So when I found myself in California and finding this freedom and thinking about photography as a stage where I can put in all of these different ingredients in my life and kind of create a more expansive way in which I could see myself reflected, that was the train that I kept running on until now. Next slide. So, you know, like in my work, I use the large format film camera. So my camera stays still. What I do is I move in or out the people or objects, color patterns in the frame. I think of my photograph as a stage, and I fill it with these ingredients from my background, from my culture, from my experience. This photograph was made at my sister's wedding ceremony at the temple. So what I did, I set up the night before, I put my lights on the sides, and I only had 15 minutes to do this, but we kind of rehearse this poses the day before. And that's kind of my process. Next slide. And, you know, a lot of the time also with being queer and not being able to fully occupy one facet of my identity to the fullest, I question a lot. So then I question myself a lot in terms of what is the boundaries and what is the line between staying true to myself and creating a compromise in which I could include other people and also be a medium in which they can open up their own perspectives. And I feel like that's what photography offers to me. For example, this photograph was also made during the time of my sister's wedding. The Caucasian man in the corner is my husband. We've been married for 7 years now, and my family knows about this, but we are never able to just present that that fact, and I always feel secluded and also kind of being unsure, which is not the best place to be in, especially in terms of thinking about love, acceptance. I sometimes I wonder, like, okay, mom, you love me so much. If you can say that you love me unconditional, what about the gay conditional? You know, like, why can't I just be open and be gay? Next slide. But also at the same time, I ask myself, am I just being this selfish Westerner in wanting to put forward myself and my comfort above everybody else? So this juggling is always in me, I feel like, and that's also integral with the way that I think, which is on a spectrum. And I feel like this is my strength as an artist and as a maker. Next slide. I think I only have 2 minutes to kind of just go through things, but then having that sense of clarity really helps me in my practice, in my photography, because it allows me to use this medium to kind of create this new world altogether, where the lines between Western philosophies and Asian philosophy becomes really blurred because I'm gay. And on top of it, I ask these questions where it's not easy, black or white, yes or no. And in the beginning of my life, that always caused me a lot of problems and alienation, because I feel like, why do I make things so complicated for myself and other people? Should I be more steadfast? Should I be more strong and be more, I don't know, be manly about it? But then really that doesn't ring true to my authentic disposition as a human being. Next slide. And so one way that I can acknowledge my humanity, my fullness, my queer ass person who is in America from a complicated Asian background in the world of photography. This photograph is my Caucasian husband carrying the weight of my family with these crackers that I grew up eating as blinders in their eyes. So in this instance, I can acknowledge that I am still their son, but at the same time, I'm also my own self. Next slide. And this photograph was made when my mom and sister came to visit me in America right after COVID. They went on a shopping spree. I was so stressed because suddenly my mom took over my house as if this is also her house, which is very Asian. And also being this conflicted self in the spectrum, I didn't know how to like behave, because I love her so much. I cannot just like tell her no. So the best I could do is like, let me arrange all of your stuff so you can easily pack everything. In return, sit over there and let me take a photo of you. So I feel like acknowledge, she gets the benefit of it, and we both miss each other in the end. Next slide. This photo was also made when my mom and sister came at that same trip. They're in the middle. If you can see, they're just right behind these diverse walls of beautiful youth students that I got to collaborate with. And I think I can just pause at that, and we can continue more during the conversation to give Pa time. And we can just click through the next slides. And yeah, thank you. These are the negatives, I guess, just to show you as proofs that everything that you see is on camera. And to me, that is what truly made me love photography, because out of all of the confusing things in my life, everything that I create happens in front of the camera. Okay, thank you, and I give you Pa.
Thank you so much, Leonard. That was such a beautiful presentation. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to everybody that's currently here. Thank you to Vivian, Alex, Elisa, Marci, Stephanie, Christina, Kwon for putting this panel together. Thank you, Leonard, for being my my partner in this presentation. So I think that when I talk about my practice, it's really important to tell people that I am Hmong and that I was born in Laos, and we, my family and I came to the United States in the mid 80s. A question that I often get asked is like, why did you come? And I often will say that we came because of the American War. We call it the American War. Americans know this war as the Vietnam War, right? So Hmong people participated in the war with the Americans, and when the Americans pulled out, we also, a lot of Hmong people also lost their homes in Laos, and so they came to they came to America and other parts of the world, but mostly the reason why we're here is because of the Vietnam War. And so I say this because the war is so present in my community, in our everyday. And so if you can go to the first slide. I also want to say too that the work that I'm going to be showing you all is a very, very small compilation of all the bodies of work that I've made, because I think that for me, that becomes really important in talking about like really the idea of kinship and kinship within my family, but then also kinship within my community and what that looks like, because it is very much about, for me, this sort of collaboration, not with just my family, but also with the community and making all the works that I've been able to make, right? And so this body of work is titled Attention, and it's of portraits of Hmong veterans who have fought in the war during the Vietnam War, but are not recognized by the United States government. So what does that mean? So the uniforms that they're wearing, the pins that they have, they were not issued to them by the United States government. They actually have gone out on their own, have bought these uniforms, have bought these pins, in some cases have made their own pins and medals, and have given themselves these things. And this is in, you know, for me, it's a way of inserting themselves back into a history that has all but forgotten them, right? And so I often think about like what it means to be a Hmong woman in my community, to make these photographs, to give voices to these men. There's something about that I think is really like fascinating, and sort of I wouldn't call it beautiful, but also sort of really revealing too in itself. If you can just go to the next slide. And so these were, I was really thinking about had gone to a National Portrait Gallery and had seen these really beautiful paintings of veterans, of war generals, and was really thinking about ways in which I can take these sort of the tropes that I had seen, the velvet backdrop, the sort of painterly quality, the way in which they're looking at the camera, the lighting, how can I bring that into the work, right? And can I make portraits of men, these Hmong veterans, and talk about that speaks to this history, right? The history of these forgotten men, the history of, of how the Vietnam War is talked about in the United States versus how my community talks about the war. And so all those things become really, really important to me. And if you can go to the next slide. So as Alyssa has alluded to, in my practice, I really am really interested. I really am interested in different genres of like the photographic medium, but then also like the different vernaculars in photography, right? And so this body of work is titled My Mother's Flowers, and it is three types of images that are found on a dating website, images that I then turned use as reference images, and then that I've made, and then also these black and white images of my mother's flowers. So if you can just go forward. This is an image that I've made based off of one of the images that I've found on this like Hmong dating website. And if you can just go to the next one. And so these this body of work really for me touches on what it means to really thinking about the American dream. I think this is the really in my practice, the first body of work where I was really utilizing images and then really thinking about them more conceptually. Whereas before, I don't think that I was, and so for me, what does it mean to for my mother to be collecting these fake florals that she has all over our house, that she interchangeably will put things in, add things, take things out, right? And to make her house feel more American, whatever that means, and then also like from the dating website, these images of young Hmong girls, Lao girls who are then marketing themselves for Hmong American men so that they could come to the United States. And then also thinking about these those portraits and like how can I then recreate those portraits here, right? So this is sort of really thinking about these different ways and how different ways in how ideas of beauty and like the American dream and how they're all really blended together. And I was really interested in the ways in which like the beauty standards in like Southeast Asia, like how different and how similar they were to like these sort of Western ideas of beauty, and how these Hmong American men who were interested in Hmong Laotian girls because they were these sort of traditional, unaltered by Western ideology, but then also like was really interested in, but then are attracted to these sort of like Western like beauty standards. And so that's that work. If you can just go next. This is a body of work titled My Grandfather Turned into a Tiger, and it really much is about this a story, right? And so like in my work, I'm really interested in issues that are within the Hmong community, but then also within my own family too. And so the work is very much about the community. The work is for the community, but also I think like I'm also thinking about how like the idea of like access and like what that means, like what that can look like photographically for other folks who are not maybe who are not part of my community who want to be able to access the work. So this is a set of 4 images that are titled my grandmother's favorite grandchild, and basically it's one image that my grandmother had commissioned, and then I then in turn took all of my girl cousins' face and have like have photoshopped them into the work, and so that we all then can be my grandmother's favorite grandchild. If you go next. Again, really thinking about the photograph and the story. I think Leonard had said that, for him, the frame is the frame is like the stage, and he's adding in ingredients. And I think like for me, like the images words, punctuations, sentences, and when they are then put together and threaded together, they speak to this sort of like larger idea, or what I think is what I hope my larger idea could then come across, right? And so my grandfather turned to a tiger really is very much about this story about my grandfather, but it's really a story about loss, love, lust, desire too. Next. I'm just going to show you. Okay, so this is also part of that, body of work. If you just keep on going, I think if you can just keep on scrolling through, the community that I think it's also really important to talk about for me, kinship in the community. I used to photograph just my family, but realized that I needed to like really do go out into the community and to make work in the community too. And so a lot of these photographs required, I don't really think about the work as like just my work. I think about whenever I'm making photographs of other people, it is a collaboration. It very much is a collaboration, and it's sort of this like give and take. So I get something when I make the work, and they also get something when they let me photograph them. These last few images are of Northern California. And while I'm not making photographs of people, I'm in these communities photographing these spaces that the local government and that also maybe the federal government deemed like illegal. And so it's just the kinship that is required to be able to be let into these spaces to make this work for me is like really, really important too. So this body of work is titled Mount Shasta. It's made in the Mount Shasta area, and it's very much about the landscape of Mount Shasta, but also talking about the history of Hmong agriculture within the Hmong diaspora, but then also the history of this space too, right? And so what it means to for Hmong people to use their agricultural knowledge to grow and cultivate marijuana, but then also sort of this recycled history of Hmong people in Laos cultivating opium too, right? And so that's what this work is about. But I just want to say thank you so much. I'm gonna turn it over to the group, and I think like we then can have like a discussion about a further discussion about both mine and Leonard's work and about the book. So thank you so much.
Stephanie, do you wanna start?
I mean, those are really both great
Yeah.
presentations. I learned a lot. And I really loved how sort of different things looked. It wasn't, we have Leonard, who's doing very tableau photography, which is very staged with a large count format, but then we also have Pa with a combination of still lifes and studio portraiture and landscape, and it's all about, but all of them seem to have this thread of collaboration and give and take, which I thought was really interesting that you both touched upon. Like that was that notion of an expanded family and that sort of community, and how that sort of reflects larger issues about being Asian American and Asian in America. So I just thought that was really beautiful. Where should we begin?
Yeah, I mean, I also learned a ton. It was great to hear both of you speak and to see your pictures. I maybe I'll begin by asking a question that actually Stephanie's intro I think really encapsulates, which you talk about kind of kinship and visibility, but also about the way photography has been used to surveil, to kind of categorize. So there's these kinds of there's this double-edged sword of visibility that is, I think very much a part of its history, like the history of photography that you both are engaging with. And so I was wondering if both of you could just talk a little bit about the stakes of that for you, of both the affordances, but perhaps some of the considerations you make in thinking about photographing people who are parts of your family or your communities.
In terms of, that question, the common question that people would always ask me is like, wow, how did you get your mom to do it? How did you get your dad to do it? As if it's like a shocking thing that their parents wouldn't necessarily volunteer to do for them. And I don't know, I honestly asked this question to myself as well. Of course, in the beginning, it was about getting good grades in photography classes. But also later on, I also feel like, wow, they cannot publicly say that they love me as who I am, but they are doing all of this shit for me. So then how do I understand that gesture that is not spoken, but also kind of build like my understanding around that, and also how they perceive their own imagery for other people's to see. And that's, I guess that's part of me wonder if it's like a generational thing where, or sometimes I wonder, oh, maybe because you only see me once a year and you know what I do, and then they just volunteer themselves. I wonder, but also at the end of the day, I also feel like the work that I make, the photographs that I make, it shows the bond that I have with the people who are in the photographs. And this also becomes like my question for Pa, in thinking about like, I'm curious how you are when you're in action. How do you address your subjects? How do you invite them in? How do you give them directions? Because to me, I feel like not having a digital camera and having just a film camera really helps me, because we're not there to attain the most perfect glamour shots, you know, we're just there to be together, and this is the objective that we're going for. And that mindset really helps me in creating my photographs. So that's why I'm also curious to Pa, like, how are you in action? Because to me, maybe part of my answer to that question is maybe because of the film nature of the work. People know that, oh, this is a stage, this is a performance that we do, because this is so uptight and also a lot of light and everything, you know? So to them, this is not just like a documentation of their face or documentation of what they're doing.
Yeah. So I think like I wanna just go back to what you had said about your mom and like her participation. And so I want to say too that like my parents are like they have a really hard time understanding like what I do like as an artist, or like they don't even understand what being an artist like is, because like it isn't a 9 to 5. I don't go to work and I don't work for a set amount of hours and then whatever, right? So they don't understand what being an artist is, and especially a photographer. But their willingness to participate, my mother especially, if I say, Mom, can I photograph you in your bedroom with your shirt off? She has she will not hesitate to do that, and she will not like question why I want to do that. It's just like her willingness to participate. And I think like for me, that like even though she doesn't understand like what I do as an artist, like she is like blindly committed, like completely 100% committed to like me and the practice, right? And so I feel the same with my father. My father isn't in a lot of my photographs, but if I say, one year when I was in graduate school, I wanted to go to Laos, and I wanted to buy, I didn't have money to buy film, and my dad just just said, okay, here's a credit card, buy all the film that you need to buy to go to Laos, and so it's this sort of collaboration, whether it is like in front of the camera or behind the camera, that I think like for me is like really great. I often think about too what it means to yeah, like what it means to photograph your family and to like share your family and the things that you care about, like out in the world. You know, and I feel like that, like I think like more so now than ever, just been so like more aware, more self-aware of like what that is, like, and how much privilege like that is, and like sort of like the collaboration that is required. And I don't think like my parents, like especially like for me, like I don't think my parents or my siblings like understand, like, yes, I'm gonna make these photographs of you, and then like they could show up in a magazine, they could show up in a museum, you know, they could show that, like there's these different places that they could show up in. And I think like they don't have a say in like in where and how it shows up. And I think like, or that I like that I wasn't aware of, like didn't it's not that I didn't care to ask before, but I think like even more so now than before, I feel like if I'm gonna show them in a museum, I'm gonna ask my siblings if they're okay with me. You know, I'm just letting you guys know that there's images of you that's gonna be in something. So there's like so many of that, right? And so I think about that a lot. I also think about what it means to like be an artist and to be able to like make this the work that we make, and then to like to decide how things are shown in these public institutions, and like and what to like what to take, what to keep for myself and what to add, right, in the didactics, you know. So for instance, I had a show at an institution, and I had a video piece, and I decided that I didn't want to have subtitles because I wanted to make the people coming to see the work, you know, if they wanted to know what was being said in the work, they could take their phones out and they could, you know, press, you know, take a picture of a QR code that could, you know, send them to a link. You know, there's just this sort of these like extra added step that needed to happen. And then I think like oftentimes what we do is as artists and as artists of color, and I think that I feel like for me, I'm always trying to give away like everything, and because I want to be understood, and I want people to be able to access like me. And so it's always like trying to give away these things. And like as I don't know, as like a older artist, I think I'm finding that like a withholding is so like is very important, you know, and that like if people want to work, they want to know things, they're going to work for things. And so that becomes really important for me.
That's really interesting. I think like, I mean, like the way that you guys have been talking about how your family has been so supportive has been one of the things that I wanted to think about with the introduction of the issue, and that sort of notion of just intergenerational support. The last line is about "we are with you," and then that like everything. It also like, you know, it just makes me cry too. But I'm just like, oh yeah, like my parents have never sort of like said no when I wanted to do like some sort of project or look through their family photos and explain and like talk about their experiences. But I know that there's some things that they just can't articulate, they just can't say that, or just don't have pictures of. And so that's where I think like your work and like the camera is starting to help excavate some of those things or work through maybe some of those issues. And I thought something that was quite interesting in both of your presentations was how you both talked or explored issues of masculinity and heteronormativity and patriarchy. I think Pa, with the military uniform, that's definitely up there. And then I think Leonard, you're thinking a lot about that with your husband and how that's something that, you know, you're exploring. Have you guys like experienced like pushback or sort of what is the sort of things that you've learned from that sort of exploration of stuff that's kind of like within the family, but also things that are bigger issues that are not some things that are talked about?
Can I start? So when I started photographing the veterans, it was really hard for me to access the veterans like myself. I needed my father to like make the connection. So my dad would then like connect with the person in charge of this association, and he would say like, my daughter would like to come and make photographs for you. Is that possible? And so they would then say yes to my dad, and my dad would have to go with me to make these photographs. I mean, it's just like so wild, right? So to think about, so I think about that in the ways in which I think about how like my own community, like how we talk about like the war, right? And how historically the war has been so much about like the Hmong men, and that we forget that like Hmong women also existed in this time, and that like they also like participated in the war, maybe not like as soldiers, but like they like, you know, they took care of their, you know, their kids, they took care of the home, they, you know, some were nurses, you know, and so like, and so there's this sort of whole history that I think like that even in my own community that's been sort of erased. And so I often like I think about like what it means for me as a like a Hmong American woman to like to be able to like photograph these men, to give these men voices, but then also like the ways, and then also thinking about the ways in which I went about doing it. Like I couldn't have just done that myself. I needed my father to like make those introductions, you know, which is like wild to me. So.
And to give you credit, thank you for wanting to make the work, you know, despite having to go through your dad, because truly, I also feel like that's kind of the sense of responsibility I feel like that I carry for myself. My citizenship is Indonesian. I have an American green card. And part of the reason why I want to move to America is because there's no protection for queer people in Indonesia. And part of me, I feel like I want to use my medium as a way to open up different ways in which queer people can feel safe and feel visible, and especially in the context of a very conservative setting. You know, the common argument of people in Indonesia against queer or homosexuality is that they're vulgar, they're not against the traditional values of decency, shit like that. But I'm here to show like, just because I'm queer and just because someone is queer, they don't just put forward their sexuality as the most priority in their lives. You know, like I think for Indonesian culture, they're so afraid that accepting homosexuality is accepting vulgarity or accepting bigger questions that they don't want to deal with. And part of my responsibility, I feel like, and also part of my stress sometimes, is to kind of figure out this way in which all of these worlds can coexist. Because a lot of the time I feel like a ghost. Like I feel like I'm part of different worlds, but I don't belong to any of them. And I think just taking that kind of experience and insight that I have about my own identity, I then use my medium to kind of explore those tensions, because I cannot just, I don't know, like within myself, if I wanted to be free and just fully just be American, I can just like, okay, goodbye, mom. I just want a clean cut boundary divorce. Goodbye from you. I'm already here. I don't want to be taken down by this responsibility. And I can just be a whore on Instagram. You know, but at the same time, I just don't feel like that's my calling, or that's like intrinsically me. So that's why I feel like in these questions that photography offers, I feel more at home, because photography doesn't give you clean-cut, clear answer, but the way that it is being consumed and processed is truly closer to who I am as a person and a thinker, you know, like considering different angles and perspectives, which is still composing one singular frame. Yeah.
It sounds like there's a way in which the images that both of you are making are giving a sense of vocabulary, or like a sense of a way of talking about things that might not be like fully comprehended or accepted, but it's a way for both yourself to sort of narrate, I guess, but also just to give voice and to give like a vocabulary, something to like actually latch onto, which I think is really really cool.
Just got like, I totally agree with that. And, you know, I know we've just got a couple more minutes before we turn it over to audience questions, but just really quickly, you know, one thing I was going to ask you was just, you know, the question I get the most from my students, from the students I teach, the undergraduates, is just like, how do you do it? How do you make your art? Like, how does one be an artist like in this world? And so I just wanted to ask, what advice would you give to students who are looking to make art?
You go first.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say that consistency is like really, really important, you know. I think that there's been so many times where I've, you know, like felt like I wasn't going anywhere, or that I didn't make the kind of progress that I needed to make in order to be, you know, like an artist. But I like, it's like really pushing through it, you know. And so consistency, like being consistent with like the work that you're making, whether it is like, you know, like going out every other week and like making a photograph, or like, you know, like making sure that you're applying to things, or making sure that you're, you know, just being surrounded by artists, and then also like just being consistent is like the advice that I would give.
Yeah, I agree with consistency. You know, to me, I am a proponent that creativity is important, because it allows you to go beyond the binary, you know, it allows you to go beyond the box that you have for yourself. And that is to say, everybody should pick up creative things and find creative outlet. And if you're extra persistent, if you're extra, I don't know, you're extra hardcore, then go pursue a life as an artist, because it's not all glamour, it's not all easy peasy, but I'm crazy and persistent like that. And I feel like this to me gives me more value in my life than trying to excel in different values like monetary. So yeah, go be creative is my advice to everyone, and especially students. And if you think you can make this challenge, this obstacle to be part of your buy-in into the art world, join us, you know, because I'm not gonna lie and say it's gonna be easy. Sometimes it's kind of uncertain and questionable, but to me, that is so much to like my life experiences. Nothing has always been like on a clear track. And to me, I can excel in this situation. That's why I say, if you're a bit persistent and you're also have this big passion and drive behind you, come join us, you know?
I'm going to tell them they told you to come join them.
Yes.
So I guess we can go on to audience Q&As now. Stephanie, do you want to read one, or I can read one?
Sure. I think I'll take a look. I guess, okay, so I think the one that sort of is collapsing a couple of the questions is about process. And how has your process evolved, and how has that actually changed your relationship to family / community? What do you hope that the people take away from your work?
Yeah, so for me, I think that there was a period in my life where all I did was shoot with the 4x5. I felt like I wasn't, I felt like I wasn't, like I needed to shoot with the 4x5. And I think like moving away from the traditional, like moving away from the 4x5 was like a money thing, you know, like I didn't have the resources to you know, to scan my film, and then also like to like get it developed, like all of that was like costing money for me. And so I'd switch, and I think for me, what I find really wonderful about this sort of new way of making for me is that like I could still very much like keep like the process of like the 4x5 that I love so much, right? And so for me, it was a sort of like, there was a very slow, you know, needing to figure out where the camera needs to be, where the light is coming from. And so this sort of really slow process for me with the 4x5 that I loved so much. And so like I'm learning how to do that like with the with like a digital medium format is like very hard, because you then can like just take a photograph and, you know, and move on, and you could see, and but I try not to do that. And so like that's really how like my process has sort of really evolved. But I would think that like the way in which I make photograph, like the tools that I use to make the photograph has definitely evolved. But I also think like the process in which I think about like the image making is still very like similar, has not evolved at all. You know, I think about, you know, if there's an issue within my community, there's a question that I'm really curious about, I will research and then I will make, and that's how it's always been. So for me.
And for me, I feel like I really love the 4x5 process. Because to me, it's like that sense of control. And also, you know, I get to be the director, stage manager, you know, stage designer, everything in the lighting, composition. I get to be all of those roles while also enlisting people that I care in my life that want to spend that time with me. Because the process is not like, oh, let me get a picture of you and then you go. No, the process is like, you're going to spend at least 2 hours with me today. And we hang out, we drink coffee, we drink tea, you know, while I set up and everything. And what I feel like, to me also, that was important because that's what I want to spend time doing. I want, you know, that quality time with the subjects is part of the collaboration. And over time, you know, with more attention that I get, especially my sister, in the beginning, she would just like, okay, I just woke up, where do you want me? Nowadays, she won't just offer herself like that. She would just like, let me put the puffy eye thing first before we do anything. But to me, I also learned how to progress in my process. So knowing that I will only use the 4x5 format, how can I use different materials? How do I go into different setups? Because it is kind of hard. And, you know, I think part of how I make it work with the 4x5, I only see my family at least once a year. So it's always like planning a big event of like taking a lot of photographs and, you know, making budgets, making this or that. But then the rest of the year, I take on different projects that help me pay for that big event. So I also learn how to use the process to get what I want. For example, just 2 days ago, I was having this conversation with my mom about going to Indonesia in November to my cousin's wedding, but then also to make work. She was really happy that my ticket is open-ended and the return ticket is after Chinese New Year. So she was really happy that I'm gonna be there for Chinese New Year. And I asked her, okay, how do I go about giving out red envelope? Because now I'm married, and in the tradition, I don't accept red envelope, I give out because I'm married. But then she'd be so quick to put me back in the closet. She was like, you don't have to do that. Nobody knows. I was kind of angry, but then I was just like, okay, how can I make this a bargain with her? And then I was like, okay, can you help me find a coffin for a photo shoot when I go there? Can you help me out with that? And of course my mom would, but to me, that is like, wow, 5 years ago, I would just be so offended. I would just be so angry that like, I'm not gonna go back home anymore because you say this shit. But now I feel like I improve in the social skill in making the photograph that is very much part of the process of how I make work. So that's kind of like the progress that I can see in my practice.
Yeah.
How my social skill, but then engaging my mom, knowing like, okay, you're uncomfortable with me being gay, but a coffin, okay, we can figure it out.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
So much.
Thank you for sharing. You know what that I guess that what that raises for me is something that I've kind of noticed in both of your answers actually, is that, you know, what you're talking about really is photography is not just documenting kinship, it's generating it, you know, and it's generating it in a different way. You know, that there's something about that kind of mediation of, you know, talking through and collaboration that like generates like a different kind of like a relationship, you know, that still has all of the histories of those relationships behind it, but it's creating something really new. And I really love that. And that teaches me a lot. So I wanted to read another question from Tausif Noor, who's actually of course a contributor to this issue. Thank you for being here. So I enjoyed hearing about how photography for both of you is a process of give and take and is collaborative. So kind of what we're talking about. To me, this epitomizes the idea of becoming in this issue's title. Becoming is always in two directions. So how has this process of discussing your work for the issue impacted your own idea of Asian in America?
Leonard, you want to start? I feel like I've been...
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, maybe this common thing within Asian cultures, sometimes when you meet a new Asian person, you're like, oh, what's your background? Oh, you're Japanese. And then we move on and then we get to learn more about each other, which is like, and, you know, it's almost like, oh, you're Korean, no big deal. Now let's do the karaoke. It's almost like we acknowledge and then we move on and then we enjoy each other, which can be harder when it's people outside of your race sometimes, you know, especially my husband is Caucasian. So sometimes I notice that pressure, but specifically being an Asian photographer and meeting all of these other Asian thinkers and makers and hosted within this house. To me, you know, all of those questions about the coffins and everything came out because I feel so, wow, I don't have to be so hard in pointing out that I'm Asian anymore. That now I can go like really think about my life in a larger perspective about life and death, about weddings, about family making, you know, things like that. So it really took the pressure off of me because in the beginning I have this pressure like, oh, do I introduce people to my home culture? But then now I feel more of this like kinship that like, I don't have to be so thick about it, you know? I don't know, that's kind of like how it has given me this like release and also like support.
Yeah, I feel this exact same way too. I mean, I think that like, I went to a graduate program where I a while back where I didn't know any other Asian American photographer aside from, you know, the really big ones that were there at that time, you know, right? So like An Mei Lee, Patty Chang and other, just sort of these like big Nikki Lee Smith. I just like, they were like the only Asian American photographers, artists that I knew. And but to be able to like pick up this book and to be able to see that there are other photographers who are of like Asian descent, who are like you know who are in this, to be able to see art historians and writers in here talking about like the things that I'm like really really interested in, like that for me is like wonderful. And like I don't know, like there's something really beautiful about this book, that this magazine, right? So like I've bought quite a few copies so that I can give them out to my artist friends who maybe don't necessarily have access to Aperture the magazine, right? And so I just like, I don't know, like that for me has been really really wonderful, in that like it has like greatly impacted the way in which I think about what it means to be Asian American artists, with like in a field that's like so dominated by white artists, and so yeah, really really happy and really really excited about like where this is going and the direction that it's taking. So
Guys, that was really nice. And I think that was really, I think, part of the sort of joy of making and editing this issue is just to see like there was an aspect of it in terms of just asking people like other curators, other writers, other artists, and sort of asking people like, well, who do you think is making good work? And it's kind of that sort of bringing together, because everybody's making such different work, but seeing all of these things together, that was really sort of so impactful. And so it was really such a sort of wonderful experience. And it was a part of kind of like how I think the comment was about how making photographs for both of you seemed to be about generating these relationships. Like I think editing a magazine was similar, just sort of creating these relationships for the first time. Many people would never ask this question about like who are young Asian American photographers who are doing good work. And so yeah, this was a joy to do.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, the photographs were the artwork in that magazine was really great, but equally so were like the essays and like, I mean, just like they're so important. And as an educator, I mean, I think that like those are essays and interviews that I'm gonna use in my classes. So
Me too.
I feel legit, to put it. I feel legit. That's how it feels, and that is empowering. It makes me want to do more, and it makes me want to just like figure out how I can offer that.
Yeah, it really does like feel really wonderful, like to be seen, like to like what Leonard was saying about like feeling legit, right? I think that yeah, there's something really important about that, like that. So like there's a validation of sort that has happened because of that book. So
Yeah. So I can read another question. I mean, we have so many wonderful questions. I'm sorry we're not able to get to all of them. But I wanted to read one. I'm a mixed Indo first-gen American, grew up with a lot of Asian and American traditions, and can totally relate to trying to figure out my multiple identities. How has the photography process changed you and your family? What's next for you?
Like I think the biggest notion is still about acceptance towards queer identities. In Indonesia, I could be prosecuted and put in jail because I am openly, making artwork and kind of being open about being queer and sharing my thoughts. In Indonesia, they can build a case against me, but at the same time, I don't want to let fear be the operator of all of this, because I feel like I can acknowledge that fear, But then at the same time, how can I build myself up and create something that can make me feel powerful? So I think that that balancing has always been what I aspire to be better at, because it is kind of like scary and challenging, especially like, okay, if I'm going to invest all of this money to go to Indonesia to make this work, but then at the back of my head, I always feels like, okay, am I gonna get into trouble? But so much of it is also just being present in myself and being courageous and being brave to kind of like do and pursue this innate question that I have about myself and what I can offer the world, which is very Asian and very Western at the same time, you know? And to me, that makes me feel so powerful in my core, because otherwise, if I listen to all of these confusing views of how I ought to be, I can get crippled in my mind and just not be able to like make something, you know? And to me, my family has grown very open and accepting in that they see my husband, they see, okay, look at these two gays throughout the pandemic, they're just doing silly shit at home to keep each other's company. To them, suddenly like, okay, being gay is actually very boring. And then in one conversation, my mom even told me like, oh, do you know the son of this person? And then she gave me the lowdown of how bad of a son that guy is. And I was like, oh, this is your way of saying actually being gay is not that bad. Thank you, mom. You know? But to me, that is the growth that I see in my family. Like, yes, saying with words is awkward and confusing sometimes. Like, they still don't know how to tell me that I love me. But I see in their actions, I see in their participations in my work, I see in the way that they try to feed my husband. So I see in all of those gestures, oh, you're actually accepting and loving me. It's just, you just don't know how to go about it using your words to express it. So to me, I see the growth in that, you know, versus like 6 years ago when I first came out, she told me not to tell my dad. She doesn't give me ultimatums like that anymore, but you know, I see the growth. So I feel like, yeah, I feel connected in my power. I feel connected in my purpose as a human, while also acknowledging, okay, life is full of shit, really. And the goal is to not crumble under that shit, and acknowledging that shit as a way to kind of like find my own way. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I've always think about like what are the different ways in which I can talk about issues that I'm curious about, that I want to know more about, that like that are like important to me in the in my photographic practice, right? And so I think that like the photography process for me really hasn't changed from when I first started making work. I think like, yeah, like the subjects have changed, but like the ways in which I think about, you know, like how I go about making my work, like that really hasn't changed. I've always been known to my family as like that girl that takes the camera everywhere she goes, right? And so like I'm that person, and I'm also that person that like that makes weird photographs that like my parents don't understand why I need to make them, but they will stop for me to make them, and they will like, you know, like they will allow me to make them, right? And so like there is always that. And then in terms of thinking about what's next for me, I mean, I think just like, you know, just being consistent and just continue making. You know, that's, you know, really, really important. You know, I'm always thinking about things that I want to make, and I'm always researching and then making, you know, it's always like 90% of the things that I make never gets to see the light of day. But, you know, that's also very much okay too, because I'm like always making. And so I feel really great for that. In terms of like really thinking about what my hopes are for folks to take away from my photographs. You know, I really think that like the photographs for me are a window for greater and deeper conversations. You know, that is really like what is important for me. Yeah, sure, sometimes the photographs can be fun to look at, but like, can the photographs also create like spaces so that we can have conversations about things that are maybe more prevalent in the community, right? And so like, so I think about that in like when I make work and how they're being presented, and like, you know, like this, right? Like this panel, this conversation, what Leonard is saying, you know, what you all are saying, for me is like really wonderful, in that like, yeah, like these photographs that we made, we're able to like create this sort of dialogue, you know, so yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you to everyone for participating in this panel. Thank you to Stephanie and Marci for moderating, and of course, always to the artists, to Pao and Leonard for joining us this evening. Vivian, if you advance to the next slide, please. Just a few upcoming things at the Cantor related to our fall exhibitions. All of this information is available on our website. So we have some in-person events coming up. And then if you'll advance to the next slide. As always, have to plug, if you're not a member, consider becoming a member and supporting the AAAI and supporting the work that we are doing together. Thanks so much, everyone, and I hope everyone has a great evening.